Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Ground and Pound podcast, a show where, as always, we're hitting you with them elbows of knowledge. And UFC Fight Night Rio de Janeiro, Brazil is here. Oliveira taking on Gamrot in the main event. And as always, if you're enjoying the content here, hit that like and subscribe button. And before we kick things off in the prelims, it does have to be mentioned the big fella is not here this week. He'll be joining us for Contender Series on Friday. We wish him all the best. We'll be missing him, but we'll do him proud here as we kick things off in the early prelims. And first up on the early prelim opener, we've got two Brazilians kicking off a Rio de Janeiro, Brazil card. I'm sure the fans are loving that over in Brazil. They usually like to see one of their own take on a different nationality. But we've got Saimon Oliveira here taking on Luan Lacerda. And I got to say, this is some of the lowest level UFC talent that you'll probably see. I use talent in quotation marks here. But Saimon Oliveira, 3-fight losing streak inside the promotion. He really just has struggled since taking the spinning wheel kick to the body. He had an injury from a spinning wheel kick, ruptured one of his organs, and in that fight he's really talked about struggling to get back from that injury. He struggled mentally from being able to take body shots even in training, and I just don't trust a guy, at 34 years old, lower weight class, a guy on a 3-fight losing streak. He's talked about quitting the sport in the past due to that ruptured organ from the spinning wheel kick in one of his previous fights. He's a guy that wants to look to grapple as well, not necessarily known for the striking. He is very aggressive. He will look to pressure you, but when it comes to the striking, he's very wild, very looping at times, which leaves openings for his opponents. And I think realistically here that he's very unathletic, very flat-footed, and not UFC level. But when you talk about Lacerda, I mean, again, you could make a case for both of these guys in this fight, and definitely not one I'm going to be looking to bet, that's for sure. Lacerda, since June 2023, that was his last fight. Long layoff for him. Muay Thai style striker. He has got most of his victories coming via submission. He's a guy that will look to implement some grappling, body lock takedowns and trips. He does have nice timing and nice entries on his takedowns, but where I'd like to see him really have success here is keeping this one on the feet with Oliveira. I think that the 1-2 straight down the pipe is going to be best served for Lacerda, throwing straight shots. He has a nice kick from range that he can blast to the body. He can rip the lead leg of Oliveira that Oliveira is very, very heavy on. And I think that Lacerda is the better athlete here. He's the younger fighter. 2 losses in the UFC, one to Damon Blackshear and one to Cody Stamann. They're not necessarily the worst losses in the world. Being able to go to a decision loss to Cody Stamann is not the end of the world. At the end of the day, he didn't get finished. Oliveira's durability is a big question mark for me in this fight, and along with a lot of his fights. And to me, this fight really just comes down to both guys can grapple. One guy can strike. One guy can't really strike. One guy's got durability issues. I think Lacerda would be best served keeping this one on the feet, using his striking. He's taller. He should have a little bit of a height advantage as well, which I think Oliveira might struggle with, being able to get on the inside with as well and get into the clinch. I think Lacerda could take this one to the ground. He is a BJJ black belt himself. I think both guys competent on the ground, but I do think that Lacerda can have a little bit more success implementing the striking here and getting this one done. Definitely not confident in this one. Probably my least confident fight on this entire Rio de Janeiro card. But give me Lacerda here, to get this one done. Don't trust Saimon Oliveira. Both guys UFC level, I think not. And next up, we have Karolina Kowalkiewicz taking on Julia Polastri. And I think that Julia Polastri should be able to get this one done. This fight to me is pretty much a striker versus striker. And we've seen with Kowalkiewicz that she will mix in takedowns if she needs to. But I think that this one mostly plays out on the feet. She's got a very game opponent in Julia Polastri. Polastri, Muay Thai style striker. She's definitely the harder hitter out of the two. Obviously the much younger fighter as well, especially in the lower weight class. And I think that really Father Time is just catching up to Kowalkiewicz. We saw in her previous fight against Denise Gomes that she pretty much hung out in the clinch because she couldn't hang in the striking. I think the power isn't there, the speed isn't there, especially at 115. I do think that Kowalkiewicz is still very skilled, very talented, but at 39 years old, she's lost a step in terms of the speed. I think Polastri is going to be the much better athlete. I think out of the two, she hits much harder, and I think she had a pretty good showing in her previous fight against Lupi Godinez. Even though she was taken down, she was controlled, which has definitely been a path to victory that her opponents have implemented on her in the past. When you saw the fight against Jasmine Jasudavicius on Contender Series, that she was able to get her down and control her at times. Polastri is still very game though. She even in the third round of that Lupi Godinez fight, she was walking forward with her hands down, swinging wild, giving the fans what they want. I think that she's definitely game. She's somebody that can still push a pace. She can put up high volume. And I think in this matchup here, I think that Kowalkiewicz is going to have to grapple, or she's just going to get beaten up on the feet. I think Polastri is definitely out of the two a lot more game. Not to say that Kowalkiewicz isn't a tough girl. Obviously somebody that's not been finished very often as well. Somebody that will trade in the pocket with you. I just think at 39 years old here, I think the speed of Polastri is going to be too much. I do think that Polastri is pretty much a guaranteed victory, I almost want to say, unless she gets wrestle fucked by Kowalkiewicz here. Definitely somebody I'm confident in this week, a Brazilian that should get it done on the card. And to me, when you look at Karolina, I think that she's got to think about retirement at this point, 39 years old, smaller weight classes. It's never a good mixture, never a good recipe for success. But Polastri's proven to me that she's game. She will stand and trade, and she will pretty much throw a ton of volume. So give me Julia Polastri to get this one done. Somebody to watch, especially from a fan perspective. If you've never seen Julia Polastri fight before, she's definitely down for a firefight. And next up, we have Valter Walker taking on Mohammed Usman. And Valter Walker, man, he's been on an absolute tear. No one wants to get in the way of this guy, ripping guys' knees apart. Three heel hook victories. You think you can stop it? He takes you down. He finds a way. And to me, Valter Walker, man, he's impressive. He can get fights to the ground, even against guys that do have good wrestling. Big for heavyweight at 6'6". And ever since he's cut weight and kind of taken his career what looks to be a little bit more serious, he's slimmed down since his UFC debut, and he's been on an absolute tear. And I've been very impressed. I've definitely been on the Valter Walker train. And since he was able to get all these heel hook victories, I can't get in the way of him here. When you look at Usman's realistically a guy that fights behind a jab. He's a very big guy, decent in terms of athleticism, but 36 years old, a big, heavyweight in terms of, muscularity. I do think that he doesn't really have a whole lot to offer here against Valter Walker. In his previous fight against Hamdi Abdul Wahab, he was able to find the knockout after losing the first round, which was impressive. I was surprised he was able to come back in that fight. But Usman really just fights behind the jab and, sets up the right hand. He's not throwing a ton of kicks. He's not implementing a ton of takedowns. And we already know what Valter Walker wants to do. He wants to look to get fights to the ground, mix in his jiu-jitsu. He did fight over on the Russian regional scene before fighting in the UFC, which is why he's got such a heavy grappling style, a heavy wrestling style. And he sticks to that. He wants to get the fight to the mat. And I think here with Usman, I think it's just a matter of timing. Usman doesn't necessarily overextend on a ton of his shots. He really, does a good job of fighting behind the jab. But if Walker can kind of back him up and get him up against the fence here, I think he can at least wear on him, get him down later on in the fight. And Usman's not known for his power, so I don't necessarily think that Walker has to worry too much about the big shots coming back from Usman here. I think realistically, there's just a matter of timing the right takedown or being able to rush Usman up against the fence and really just get the takedown with the body lock, or get the level change by ducking under and going in for a single leg, or just getting the hands clasped together, getting down to the ground here. And once this fight gets to the ground, we've seen with Walker here that he wants to look for the submission victory. I just hope that he doesn't go for that heel hook. Usman defends and gets back to his feet and he gets tired. We've seen with Walker in previous fights that he has slowed down as fights have gone on just due to that grappling pace. But I just don't really see what Usman can do here other than sprawl and brawl. And ultimately, Walker gets tired and, Usman takes over in round 3. But even then, I don't see him being able to find the finish. So give me Valter Walker. I feel confident in him to make it 4 wins in a row inside the UFC. And I'm going to say he also finds the submission. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be heel hook, but I think that he's going to look to find the submission, find the victory here, and ultimately make it 4 in a row. Give me Valter Walker to get this one done. And next up, we have Lucas Rocha taking on Stewart Nicoll. And this fight, realistically, to me, just comes down to can Nicoll get the takedowns and control. We've seen with Rocha on the regional scene that he has been taken down in a lot of his fights. He has been controlled. Very small, even for this weight class at 5'3". He is very fast. He does a good job of being able to scramble and get back to his feet once taken down. But we know with Nicoll that he is looking to grapple. He is looking to be able to get you to the ground, control you, beat you up, and look for the submission. Most of his victories coming on the ground. And when it comes to the striking of Nicoll, it does need a little bit of work, but he does stick to that game plan of that heavy wrestling, that heavy grappling. And when we've seen with Rocha that obviously he does have a lot more experience inside of MMA, but some very questionable victories over low-level opponents. And when he did step in to face Clayton Carpenter, he was taken down, controlled by a much bigger opponent, and ultimately choked, rear naked choke in the, I believe it was the second round. But Rocha, to me, does a good job of being able to dance around on the outside. He does blast kicks from the outside as well, but in a lot of his fights, you'll see he has to come back in those fights. He is losing most of his fights and kind of rallies back and finds like a late knockout or just able to touch the chin of his opponent after losing the majority of the first or second round. And to me, when you look at the previous fight of Stewart Nicoll, he took on Jesus Aguilar in his first fight. Aguilar known for that guillotine. Both guys looking to wrestle. Both guys are very, very tough. And ultimately a grinding pace in that first round. I think Nicoll really just underestimated how good Jesus Aguilar's guillotine was. He left his neck out there in a scramble. And I think it was more of a poor fight IQ mistake from Nicoll that I think cost him in that one. Jesus Aguilar is known for his guillotine. Pretty much the majority of his wins come via guillotine. So no shame in Jesus Aguilar being able to guillotine you in that fight. And to me, I do think that Nicoll gets back in the win column here. I think he is a little bit bigger. I think that he's obviously the more physically dominant grappler out of the two. I think he's going to be able to get this fight to the ground enough and look to be able to implement damage on the ground. I think he's going to land some ground and pound here, soften up Rocha, and ultimately find a submission victory here. I don't necessarily think that Rocha is UFC level. I do think that there's some nice things to be seen by Nicoll, that I do think that he could definitely have success inside the UFC. I'm not sold on either guy, but I do think that Stewart Nicoll's game plan here of being the bigger, stronger guy, getting the fight to the ground, mixing in his wrestling, ultimately finding a submission victory here at some point with the smaller Rocha, who we've just seen get submitted inside the UFC. Give me Stewart Nicoll here to get this one done. I like him to get it done on the ground this week. And next up, we have Beatrix Mosquera taking on Irena Alekseeva. And to me, Alekseeva is not UFC level. I know that I use that phrase a lot, but when you're going to see that on a few of these fights on this card. With Irena, she's a very, very aggressive striker. She looks to be able to try and take women's heads off. She swings very, very wild, and she's not very technical, and that's usually her downfall because in a lot of her fights, her being overly aggressive, she does tend to get caught and clipped by women that tend to stay a little bit more technical in the striking. She lacks a lot of head movement. She is very game. She is very tough, but I do think that ultimately her best skill set is her aggression and her toughness. But we saw in her last fight that she fought against a grappler, and even the grappler herself was able to outstrike her on the feet. She was a big favorite in that fight as well. And I do think that Mosquera coming in here, training out of American Top Team, Mosquera does a good job of being able to implement grappling. She's very physically dominant, very physically strong for the weight class. And I do think that this one ends badly here for Alekseeva. I think that Mosquera can really just time a good takedown here, get this fight to the ground, beat her up with ground and pound. And because of our high level grappling, I don't think it'll last long once the fight hits the mat. Mosquera obviously training over at American Top Team. She trains with some of the best fighters in the world. And she does have a submission victory in the first round in a grappling match over Jenna Bishop, which I think is also just a testament to how high level her grappling actually is. And Alekseeva, even though she does have a nice knee bar victory over Stephanie Edgar, that is her impressive sort of standout performance. When you look at her previous two losses, she's pretty much just been stinkers. Old for the weight class now at 35. She doesn't have any sort of standout skills, and she doesn't have a ton of experience that she can exploit with Mosquera here. Both women, obviously not a ton of experience inside of MMA, but what I've seen from Mosquera is that in most of her fights, she does a good job of being able to stay fundamental in the striking. She does a good job of fighting behind the jab, and then she just level changes, gets her opponent to the ground, and that's where she can have success. She doesn't rush in. She doesn't try to, panic shoot. And I think with Alekseeva that realistically, the takedowns are going to be there. She's going to overextend on her shots. She's going to look to, throw sort of big winging hooks. Alekseeva is going to be able to, Mosquera is going to be able to duck underneath, ultimately find the body lock takedown trip here and get Alekseeva to the ground and ultimately shine and most likely find the submission victory here. So give me Beatrix Mosquera to get this one done, most likely by some sort of submission victory here. And next up, we have Vitor Petrino taking on Thomas Petersen. And this one should be one-way traffic. This, to me, is a tale of two styles here. Petersen is a guy that, fights pretty much behind the boxing, behind the jab, doesn't throw a ton of kicks. He will look to implement some grappling, but he is very small for the division, only at 6'1". And Petrino is an absolute man-mountain when it comes to his physical stature and his raw ability in terms of being an athlete. And with Petrino, we've seen in the past that when he's fought some of the higher-level opponents inside the UFC, he has struggled getting guillotined by Anthony Smith. However, his physical stature and his overall raw power, I think, is going to be enough here for him to get this one done. With Petersen, I just think that he's going to be too slow. I think that he's going to be too unathletic. He's not going to be able to take Petrino down multiple times. I think realistically what the UFC's done here is given Petrino a guy that's not skilled, not dangerous, and that Petrino can really just use his athleticism to get by on. And if Petrino wants to stand and strike with Petersen, I think that his power and his athleticism can serve him here in order to get the victory. If he wants to mix in some grappling, I think that he can definitely get Petersen down to the ground just with raw strength and raw power, as long as he doesn't come out here overly aggressive, get the takedown, and ultimately not find the finish early in round 1 and 2 and gas. I think he should be good. I think if Petrino can ultimately get this fight to the ground, we saw in his previous fight getting the rear naked choke. He's been working on his grappling and finding the finish on the ground, and he's being a little bit more patient. He looked like he timed that takedown very well and really just wanted to get back in the win column with the submission victory against Austin Lane. And I just think here with Petersen that if this fight plays out on the feet, that Petrino's going to be much too fast for him. And if he mixes in the grappling as well, that Petersen's not going to be able to defend the early takedowns. But I see this one being all Petrino. I think the only way that he really loses this one is if he gasses out and gets finished late in the third. But I think Vitor Petrino should be able to get this one done. Ideal opponent in terms of stylistic matchup here. I think it's going to be one-way traffic. Give me Vitor Petrino to get this one done here on this Brazilian card. And next up, we have Jafel Filho, the Pastor Filho, former dog of the week, against Clayton Carpenter. And I got to say, man, I'm going with Clayton Carpenter in this one. This kid looks impressive to me. Very, very well-rounded. Obviously coming off that unanimous decision loss to Tagir Ulanbekov, but there's no shame in losing to Tagir, a high-level Dagestani wrestler. And Clayton Carpenter has shown that his well-rounded skill set is going to be a problem for a lot of guys in this division. And I think it's going to be a problem for Jafel Filho. When you look at the kid's skills, training out of the MMA lab, he has nice BJJ, gi and no gi world Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. He'll throw up submissions off of his back. He is very big and physically strong for the weight class. And his wrestling is decent. I think that he has good top pressure once he gets you down to the mat. He sucks the legs out up against the fence. He gets on top and he lands ground and pound. And I just think that realistically, it's just a matter of time before this kid, Clayton Carpenter, puts it all together. When it comes to the striking, one thing that I do like as well which is I think is going to be a big factor in this matchup is Clayton Carpenter. He likes to throw boxing combinations, and he ends all of his combinations pretty much with head kicks. We've seen in a lot of the tape study this week that when he does land that head kick, it is a fight finisher. He has finished one of his fights by head kick. He's landed it in a few of his fights as well to kind of start off finishing sequences. And to me, when you look at Jafel Filho, the guy has got high-level grappling, very nice BJJ, but he's a little bit more of a guy that goes for submissions over position, and I think that could cost him in this fight. I think that Jafel, when it comes to the striking as well, he rushes in with wild hooks and wild combinations, running at you, and I think he leaves his chin up there for Carpenter to capitalize on. And I just think realistically this fight is going to come down to the same thing that Jafel did in his previous fight, where he lost in his previous fight against Nascimento, where he was giving up positions going for submissions. And I think if you do that here against Carpenter, Carpenter is very, very high level when it comes to the grappling. I think in the striking he's a lot more competent. I think he hits harder as well. I think that Jafel Filho's best bet here is really just to be kind of on his P's and Q's, and maybe even just swarm Carpenter early, or just kind of play this fight out in terms of, looking for a sneaky submission. But other than that, I think Carpenter's got all the skills here to win this fight. I think when it comes to the striking, I think he's going to be the better striker. And if it comes to the grappling, he's proven that he's a high-level grappler. So give me Clayton Carpenter here to get this one done. I'm fairly high on this kid. He's well-rounded, and I think he's going to learn a lot from that Tagir fight and that Tagir loss. So give me Clayton Carpenter here to get this one done on this Brazil card. And next up, we have Lucas Almeida taking on Michael Aswell. And I gotta say, man, I don't understand what Aswell has done here in order for him to be the favorite in this matchup on the betting line. It makes absolutely no sense to me. He lost in the Contender Series. He's 0-1 inside the UFC, losing in his previous fight to Balaji Oki, a guy that's not even on necessarily a good win streak and a guy that's really making noise inside the UFC. And to me as well, when you look at Aswell's skill set, he is a tough guy, heavy forward pressure. He will walk guys down. He will swing wild in the pocket. And he's really just a pressure boxer. He's not necessarily looking to throw a ton of kicks. He won't mixing a ton of grappling. He's really just looking to take your head off with the boxing, and his head movement in the boxing is very nice. But I just think that Almeida here has a lot more weapons to be able to use. Almeida, in previous fights, has been controlled on the ground. He has been taken down and held down, but he does have some nice submission victories, 5 to be precise. He has 9 KO victories, a Muay Thai black belt, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, a kickboxing black belt. The guy is very well-rounded, and I do think he has nice kicks from the outside, which could definitely be a good weapon here against the forward pressure of Aswell. He could definitely chip away at the lead calf of Aswell. He's going to be heavy on that when he's walking guys down and using the boxing as well. And I just think Almeida's got a lot more skills that he can mix in. He can mix in takedowns if he wants to. I saw him do that in the Danny Silva fight, just giving Danny Silva something to think about, just giving a little level change there, which we're not going to see from Aswell. I just think Almeida is going to fight an MMA fight where Aswell's really just going to have heavy forward pressure and really look to box. And I just don't understand here where we're getting dog money on Almeida. I think it's definitely worth a sprinkle here as a short underdog on a Brazil card. I understand that Almeida is obviously the older fighter in this matchup, and it might be where he falls off a cliff at this point in his career. But I just think that if you look at his previous fight against Danny Silva is a much better boxer, a much better fighter, I think, than Aswell is. And he was able to go to a split decision there. He was able to tag Danny in multiple situations, landing some nice kicks. And I think he can take a lot from that performance, even though he wasn't able to get the victory, and implement that here against Aswell. So I do like Lucas Almeida here. I think it just comes down to the fact that he has a lot more skills to be able to use, height and reach advantage as well. And I just don't understand what Aswell's done here in order to be the favorite. So give me Lucas Almeida here to get this one done, a Brazilian getting it done on the Rio de Janeiro Brazil card. And next up, we have Ricardo Ramos taking on Kaan Ofli. And to me, this is just going to be Ramos or pass. I don't really trust Ofli in this matchup. When you look at Ofli, 2-fight losing streak, obviously getting knocked out in his previous fight against Santos, and the fight before that as well, we have Naimov being able to out-wrestle him. When you look at Ramos' skill set, he is good on the feet. He's obviously going to have a height and reach advantage in this matchup. So when it comes to the striking, I do think that Ramos can have a lot of success blasting kicks from the outside. And when it looks to get to the mat, which is obviously what Ofli likes to do in a lot of his fights, he wants to bum rush you, get you up against the fence, kind of drag you down to the mat and use his jiu-jitsu. I don't think that's going to be available here against a guy like Ramos, who's the much bigger fighter. And we've seen with Ramos that when fights do hit the mat, those long limbs, he can throw up triangles, and he is very, very good in the BJJ world as well. I just think, to me, realistically, it's hard to trust both guys. We don't necessarily know if Ofli is UFC level. We know with Ricardo Ramos that he has struggled 2 and 3 inside the UFC respectively. And even in his previous fights, he's struggled. He's been guillotined in a few fights, so we know that Ofli's jiu-jitsu is obviously something that he has to be mindful of. However, I do think that Ricardo Ramos is the bigger fighter, that obviously got the bigger reach, and also has the higher level UFC opponents. Even if they are losses, he's still got more experience inside of the UFC. He should be the better fighter in this matchup. It's just hard to trust either guy, but give me Ricardo Ramos here to get this one done. The Brazilian getting it done in front of his home crowd here. And next up, we have Mario Pinto taking on Jhonata Denise, 2 strikers here in the heavyweight division. And we've seen with Denise that the best path to victory for him is being able to take him down, get him to the mat, implement the grappling, get into mount, and ultimately beat him up in that doctor's stoppage loss that he had. 3-1 inside the UFC, and he's known as a high-level kickboxer. And when you talk about Pinto, obviously his UFC debut against Austin Lane, it did go his way, but a very shaky performance from Pinto, a 10-0 undefeated prospect here. And the only way I really see Denise losing this fight is if Pinto comes in and grapples. We've seen that that's the path to victory if you want to beat Jhonata Denise. When it comes to Mario Pinto, obviously a very athletic striker. He does have fast hands. But when you saw in that Austin Lane fight that once the nerves and the kind of the big bright lights got to him inside the UFC Apex, he wasn't necessarily putting out his best showing. And I worry about that when it comes to Denise. Denise has obviously got a lot more experience now inside the UFC, has fought much higher level guys. And with Denise as well, if he can keep fights on the feet, he tends to be a guy that will bite down on his mouthpiece. If he does tend to sort of get into some sort of trouble in a firefight, that he can obviously implement his high level striking. He can blast kicks from the outside. We've seen with Denise as well that he does slow down in fights. Pinto, we've not necessarily seen him tested. So either guy here could definitely land a big shot on the other. This is heavyweight after all, but I'm just trusting a little bit more in the experience of Denise inside of the UFC. Pinto, even though he did get the victory and did show that he can knock guys out on the feet, all we really know is that he had a sloppy performance, especially in the first round against a guy in Austin Lane who is definitely not UFC level, that has no chin. So give me Jhonata Denise here to get this one done. Another Brazilian get it done on this Brazilian card. And next up, we have Joel Alvarez taking on Vicente Luque. And this has got to be one of my more confident picks on this entire card. Give me Joel Alvarez here. I mean, what are we doing? Vicente Luque, even though he is 33, taking a lot of damage at this point in his career. Obviously, the Brazilian, a fan favorite here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. But when you look at the wins that Vicente Luque has had recently, he's been able to beat Thembo Garimbo, not necessarily a high-level victory. Rafael dos Santos, an undersized 170-pounder. Michael Chiesa, Tyrone Woodley. These aren't wins that are necessarily all that impressive. And when you talk about Joel Alvarez, I think we're looking at a guy that's ascending in the right direction, a guy that ultimately might fight for a belt someday, huge for the weight class. And this fight is taking place at 170, but I don't necessarily think that matters. Joel Alvarez fighting at 155 has a huge weight cut, missed weight in the past. I think that pretty much the extra weight here that he's going to have is only going to improve his performances here at 170. And I think this is a great opponent here for him to get in the win column at 170 against Vicente Luque. We see in most of Joel Alvarez's fights that he has a lot of heavy forward pressure. He uses the fact that he has such an intimidating frame here at 6'3". The Spaniard is pretty much all finishes, 17 wins by submission, 5 by knockout. And we've seen with Vicente Luque that he is likely to be able to give up his neck. We saw in that Kevin Holland fight, he was dropped. Kevin Holland was able to lynch up a Darce choke. And the front chokes here of Joel Alvarez are definitely going to be on display when you think about the 6'3" long limbs of Joel Alvarez. He can definitely get some sort of front choke here against Vicente Luque. And when it comes to the striking, I think that Alvarez can definitely walk Vicente Luque down, land a big shot, obviously with that reach advantage that he does have in most of his fights. He won't have it in this one, but I do think that 6'3" frame is going to give Luque a lot of trouble when it comes to the striking. So give me Joel Alvarez here. I think that wherever this fight goes, he's going to be able to get this one done. I'm definitely going to say he's going to get a finish here against Vicente Luque. We've seen him get finished in a lot of fights, taken a lot of damage, UFC veteran. Unfortunately, I don't think this Brazilian's going to get it done in front of his home fans, but give me Joel Alvarez here, ascending in the right direction here, even at 170. I don't think the change in weight class is going to matter too much. Joel Alvarez inside the distance this week. And next up, we have the co-main event here for UFC Fight Night Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And as always, if you're enjoying the content here, hit that like and subscribe button as I break down Montel Jackson taking on Davidson Figueiredo. And I think this is a big step up here for Jackson. If you look at his previous opponents, we've got the first round knockout of Damon Blackshear. He was able to get a unanimous decision victory over Daniel Marcos. And now we're stepping up into the big leagues here with Davidson Figueiredo, a top 5 opponent, a guy that's pretty much guaranteed to be in the UFC Hall of Fame. And he had a knee injury, obviously, in his previous fight against Corey Sandhagen. Sandhagen saying that was part of his game plan, getting tangled up inside the grappling. And I do think that was something that Corey tried to do in that moment, but obviously not necessarily as impressive as knocking a guy out on the feet. It does have to be said, which is obviously what Jackson possesses. A lot of power in the hands, very athletic for the division. He's going to have a height and reach advantage in this matchup here against Figueiredo. I do like the move that Davidson Figueiredo did moving up to 135. I do think that it's definitely something he should have done a long time ago, struggling with the weight cut, a very big 125er. And obviously at 37 years old, I think for career longevity, it's definitely best served that he fight here at bantamweight at 135. But I do like Jackson in this matchup. I think that he's far too big, far too athletic. The power in the hands is definitely something that he's shown. He can mix in grappling as well. And I think with Figueiredo here that it just comes down to it's father time. 37 years old at a smaller weight class is never a good recipe for success. When you look at Montel Jackson as well, obviously coming off a long layoff and then getting back into the UFC and having 2 impressive victories just show that he's got the ring rust off. And I really just think that this fight comes down to the fact that Figueiredo is going to struggle with the height and the reach here of Jackson. Jackson is also the better athlete. He's much faster. I think he carries a lot more power than Figueiredo does. Unless Figueiredo can get this fight to the ground, implement his wrestling for 5 straight rounds, I don't really see how Figueiredo is going to be able to win this one. Give me Montel Jackson here. I feel fairly confident in him to get this one done. I think we're looking at a guy here that's going to ascend the rankings. And when you look at Figueiredo's 2 previous losses, it does have to be mentioned that Corey Sandhagen and Piotr Jan are not bad losses. So maybe Figueiredo, knows that he's facing a 3-fight losing streak and he knows his career might be on the line. His ascendancy to the title might be on the line. Maybe one might see a sort of veteran savvy performance here from Figueiredo. But I like Montel Jackson here to get this one done. Young, faster, more athletic. I think that he pushes the pace here and ultimately might even get Figueiredo out of here in the 4th or the 5th round. And that brings us to the main event here for the Rio de Janeiro, Brazil card, UFC Fight Night. And as always, if we're enjoying the content, you know what to do. Hit that like and subscribe button as we break down Matus Gamrot taking on Charles Oliveira. Gamrot stepping in here on somewhat short notice, replacing Rafael Fiziev. I was looking forward to that Rafael Fiziev fight. I have to say, a striker versus sort of striker grappler matchup. We're going to get a heavy dose of the wrestling now from Gamrot. We know what he wants to do. He has medaled in multiple grappling tournaments. Gamrot pushes a pretty heavy pace. He will shoot randomly for takedowns. The striking does need work. However, we have seen him hurt to the body as well in the past. And I do think that Charles Oliveira here on a full camp, I think he gets back in the win column. It does have to be said. I think Charles headlining a UFC Fight Night Brazil card, I think this is definitely a get-right spot for him, in my opinion. I think that Gamrot here is a guy that he needs to be able to get multiple takedowns. He needs to be able to hold you down, get control of you. And we know with Charles that he's one of the higher-level BJJ practitioners, shooter-box fighter. He's got power in the hands. He does a good job of stabbing the teep kick up the middle. And we've seen with Gamrot that he got hurt to the body in a few fights with kicks. And obviously Gamrot, being a high-level wrestler, he knows that he wants to stick to his wrestling. But when it comes to the striking, I think Charles realistically here is the much better striker. I think the old Oliveira might struggle here with the pace and the pressure when it comes to, kind of being a guy that's wilted in the past. But I don't see that here from Oliveira. I think that he can really land strikes on the feet. I think when it comes down to the 4th and 5th round, I think we're going to see Gamrot get tired. I think Oliveira is going to be able to use guillotines and chokes to be able to kind of fend off some of the takedowns, or at least be able to cause scrambles here against Gamrot, who I don't think he has the sort of the greatest top pressure when you compare it to guys like Arman Sarukian. I think realistically Oliveira is the more well-rounded fighter here on a full camp as well. Obviously was not necessarily training for a grappler like Gamrot, but when you're coming halfway across the world, over to Brazil, finding a guy in his home nation, a guy as popular as Charles Oliveira, as well-rounded, a former lightweight champion as well. I just think here that Gamrot's going to be a little bit out of his depth on short notice. Obviously, Charles being the more well-rounded fighter, I think that's going to serve him well. If he can keep this one on the feet, he can have success. I wouldn't even be surprised if Oliveira finds some sort of submission from a lazy or sloppy, tired takedown here from Gamrot, which he will shoot later on in the fight. So give me Charles Oliveira here to get this one done to round off this Rio de Janeiro fight card. And as always, if you're enjoying the content here on the Ground and Pound podcast, hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.